salutations, guys. Welcome back to Stoffel presents Play Expo Blackpool. Now we're here yet again with Rob. You always seem to keep meeting in this room.
We were in this room last time.
Yes.
We were. Which, I'm not sure it was last year or the year before, but yes, I remember.
It was a couple of years ago. It was Hyper Sentinel.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Forever, this will be my badger room.
It's the badger room. I get away with a lot in this room because there's so much noise in the main area.
Yes.
We can't really film.
Yeah.
And we were saying earlier, it says like no food or drink allowed. I just went into the bar and went, can I get a pint from the pool room? And he went, you're not allowed beer now. No, it's alright, I've got a press pass. Alright, okay then.
Oh, you just do
That's like you can do whatever you want with a press pass, it's brilliant. But yeah, because Rob Hewson from Hewson Consultants.
Huey Games these days.
Huey Games these days,
But
sorry.
yes, my dad ran Hewson.
I not just saw Huey
This is
earlier.
your own fault for branding yourself as the resurrection of consultants, you say, yes.
And with Chris Bateman, you're here with Silk.
Yes.
I've done a little bit of light reading in the last 5 minutes. You have impressive games resume.
As long as you don't look too closely, it's very impressive. Yes. I've got more than 50 published credits. Sometime either late last year or early this year, I hit 50 published credits. But not all of those games are games that I'm necessarily proud of. But they're all games I got paid for. So there is that.
It spawns on long game as well.
It does. Yeah.
My favourite author, Terry Pratchett.
Did Discworld Noir in 1999. Yeah.
And then we've got review going up on Monday for Tropico 6.
Yes, which I also worked on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I do love the Tropico 6, that's a really nice game of 6.
Yeah, I'm glad to say he's. I really like Limbic, who is the developer. They're based in Frankfurt. A really, really great team, and it was really good fun working with them. And the producer on Tropico 6, Martin, he's not at Calypso anymore. He's a really brilliant producer and a really sound guy. That was a really great project to work on. And it was also a great. You know Richard Boone. Richard Boone is the invisible part of my video games career because he doesn't really like to do press or anything like this, but he's on and off worked with me at International Hobo for quite a great many years. And he rage quit one of his other jobs and came back to work with me on Tropico 6, which was wonderful. So I really enjoy working with him. He's an incredibly talented guy that nobody's ever heard of because he doesn't do any self-promotion. He's not a media whore like I am.
We'll talk about International Hobo there.
Yeah.
Your development company. It has a wonderful ethos of Euro-British heirlooms.
Now, so there are two organisations here. International Hobo Limited, this is my consultancy, okay? Mm-hmm. So I set that up in 1999 after the release of Discworld Noir and the simultaneous collapse of Perfect Entertainment, who was the developer for it. So this is my consultancy, which I've run for, this is our 20th year of operation. So almost all the games you saw on my list of games are games that I've worked on with International Hobo. But every now and then we have a little extra money because we sucked it out of corporate purse strings here and there, and we think, wouldn't it be nice to actually make our own games? And we tried it before, back with Manifesto Games, who nobody remembers existed, but it was set up by Greg Kostikan, who made the Paranoia tabletop role-playing game. And we made this game, Play With Fire, which I like to describe as Minecraft 3 years before Minecraft. Although bombed utterly. And then we've set up this spin-off group, iHobo Games, and that's the one with the vision statement you're talking about, with these innovative Euro-British heirloom games. That's what I want to do with the development teams.
Do you want to explain what you mean by Euro-British heirloom?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful idea, but it needs a bit of unpacking.
Yeah, as is often the case for me, too many ideas packed into too small a space. Yeah, so Euro-British. The thing is, looks like we're going to leave Europe. I don't want to completely cut ties with Europe. I still feel pretty close to the continental mainland, but also I don't want to identify as only European because I'm clearly British, and being British has come to mean much more to me. In fact, the more I talk about the history of video games, the more being British actually matters to me. I was talking in the green room earlier about how have you still got that leaflet for...
I do not.
So there's a lovely piece of art mocked up for the Play Expo cover, but all of the characters that appear on it are either Japanese or American. There's like 12 Japanese characters and 2 American characters. There's no British characters. It's come to mean quite a lot to me to be British as much as anything because of the British video games industry in the 8-bit and 16-bit era. And so the Euro-British is an attempt to say, yeah, I recognise my Britishness, but also don't really, even if we're about to leave Europe, I don't really want to pretend that I'm not also part of the European project. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? If I have to be slightly traitorous to Britain to remain ties with Europe, then I'm afraid that's what I'm going to have to do.
I wasn't expecting it to get to Brexit.
Let's go Brexit. I'm sorry, I just like, we're quite a political side, but that's just going out the window on this interview. But no, I know it's that thing of, I'm really proud, like, we love indie games, and we love Australian developers. And for me, it feels like that 80s revival when I first started playing computer games on the ZX Spectrum. Yeah. It was Huey games, of course. It was at Hewson.
Hewson, yeah.
The wrong way around.
Getting back to front, yeah.
It was like Codemasters, Ocean, US Gold, Bullfrog, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like that golden age of British gaming, and it seems to be kind of history repeat itself, or the opportunity for history to repeat itself with indie games.
It definitely feels like there's something of the spirit of the original wave of games is coming back through the indie scene now, and I think that's one of the reasons why
there are key differences though.
Well, no, there are, and we could dig into those. But this is the first time since I started working in video games in '95, I think. Although I think I got an unpublished video game earlier than that. Don't need to go into that. It's the first time that I felt that the indie market, the players in the indie market, are back to actually caring about some of the inventive qualities that really mattered in the early days of video games. Yeah. There are times where the indie market has felt more like the indie market is basically making low-budget versions of AAA games, which, more power to you if that's what you want to do, but it's not really what I'm interested in. So I'm really heartened to see an indie scene now that's genuinely interested in the innovative, interesting stuff that games as a medium can do. And the heirloom games part, to complete the point, is this idea, you have a family heirloom, you have something that you pass on inside the family. Well, what I want to do with heirloom games is to pass on ways of playing games that otherwise would be lost, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So there's a sense that all video games are paying tribute to earlier video games that inspired them. But the point of an heirloom game is to take some way of playing that isn't what we're doing in video games as a whole, and save it in a way to pass it on to another generation. You have a really good marketing spin on that that's less arty-farty than my way of putting it. Gameplay remastered.
It's something I can't even remember.
You can't remember the spot. You weren't expecting that.
You do a lot at the moment with Neo
remastering lost genres.
Remastering lost genres. Yeah. So that's the sort of the heirloom games idea, to try and find things that were really creative and interesting, but they don't have successors as such, and to find a way to make those games so that entirely new audiences can rediscover that way of playing.
And I'm guessing that's exactly how Silk came about then.
Yes, so Silk is. There's lots of things I could say about Silk. I'm not jive talking, as you probably realise. But one of the things that motivated it right from the outset was to pay tribute to the late Mike Singleton. And particularly Lords of Midnight, although I've got a lot of love for Midwinter as well, which is one of his later games.
So Lords of Midnight was his 84 title, like 1984.
That's exactly right, yes. And 84-85 saw 4 British games that became the template for the open world genre that has now, in my view, become a little bit stale, but never mind that. And these 4 games, some of them are well known. Elite is well known. Another 84 game, Elite, is very well known for its influence on Grand Theft Auto. And then there's Hewson Consultants' Paradroid, which might actually be my favourite game of the 20th century. Which also has this open world before we called them open worlds, right? And it's I suspect that also influenced DNA. And there's Mercenary.
So you're stealing cars instead of stealing robots.
Right, exactly that. Yeah. There's Mercenary, Escape from Targ. Do you know this one?
Yeah.
This is also a little bit obscure, but it's a vector graphics game like Elite, but it's very heavily narrative. You start by crashing on this planet, and you find yourself between two warring factions. And I suspect again that this has influence on Grand Theft Auto. So the original Grand Theft Auto had a faction system, quite a bit like Mercenary Escape from Targ. And the fourth of these four games is Lords of Midnight. And my feeling has long been that Lords of Midnight is the one that doesn't get the love or respect that it deserves, because it was so damn hard to get to grips with. Far too many if you made an arcade style game, right, a very large audience picked it up and played it. And I love arcade games. I spent a lot of time in the arcade growing up. But Lords of Midnight required you to spend quite a lot of effort learning how to understand what the game was doing and how to play it.
And sometimes too much effort.
Yeah,
for players who
way too much effort for most players. And I understand and respect that, but on the other hand, that's a game that really spoke to me. And once I got to grips with how it worked, I spent ages banging around the world of Midnight. And do you know it well, Lords of Midnight?
I've played briefly about 15, 20 years ago, I think was the last time I played it. So I can remember flashes of it, but not too
So one of the things, it's basically the best adaptation to video games of the Lord of the Rings that never had the license. So you can really see how the Lord of the Rings story's been adapted. And one of its selling points at the time was you can play it as an adventure game or you can play it as a strategy game. But basically at the core of it is this huge landscape, a square-based grid landscape that you go around. And in the adventure game, you're exploring with Morkin, let's not call him Frodo, trying to find the Ice Crown, let's not call it the Ring, and find a way to destroy it, right?
Yeah.
And then in the battle game, you're recruiting lords to go to Zajagiff, let's not call it Helm's Deep, in order to defend against this invading horde. I beat the adventure game back in the 80s quite happily, but I didn't beat the strategy game until a few years ago. Chris Wilde did a brilliant port of Lords of Midnight for Android and iOS, and I took it away to my in-laws' house in Tennessee over Christmas, and finally sacked the Ushgarok, let's not call it the Dark Tower of Mordor. I was really satisfied, and I think at that moment I thought, do you know what? I've tried several times to make a tribute to Lords of Midnight, and I never succeeded. Maybe now is the time. And that was probably the first time I started thinking about whether it was even going to be possible to do something like that and have some hope of it being a game that people might actually want to play.
I said it's quite an ambitious thing to put something that big together. But how did you go from this, inspired by this, not Lord of the Rings, to the Silk Road into AD? That's a bit of a jump.
It seems like a jump, but I mean, look at it from my perspective. I know I want to pay tribute to this style of game, right? But I can't just make another Lords of Midnight. In fact, this has already been tried. Legions of Ashworld is a brilliant sort of reboot remake style Lords of Midnight game, and it bombed horribly, which is a real shame because it's a brilliant piece of work. So I've got to do my commercial side kicks in here, you see. Want to make the tributes to this quite difficult to make game style. Want to do it
for people to get into play.
Want to try and do it in a way that has some hope of picking up an audience on the other side. So the stuff I wanted to keep from Lords of Midnight was the square-based map and the way time works in the original game. So I don't know if you remember, but you move characters and the time of day passes, and then you get to the end of the day, and then in Lords of Midnight the enemy moves during the night, and then you start another day. No, I really like the way time worked in that game. So I wanted to keep that, I wanted to keep the square-based map. But I knew I had to do something else. I've always had this love of the 200 AD time period. I actually made a tabletop role-playing game, we didn't publish it, but when I lived in Tennessee, to 2007 I want to say, I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, because my wife's family are from around there. And Rob Briggs, who was an aeronautical engineer of all things, and I made a tabletop role-playing game also called Silk, set in 200 AD. And the thing I love about 200 AD is in Europe there's the Roman Empire, and it's at the height of its power, and it's also at the height of its hubris, because the Republic has pretty much fallen here. It's a bit like US today. They may still say they're a democracy, but they're kind of busy being an empire. Sorry, Americans. And so we've got this.
What we are back in Tennessee at Christmas.
We've got this bullish Roman Empire on one side, and then at the other side is Three Kingdoms China. So this is the period in Chinese history where everything just completely falls apart, basically. They quell an uprising, and during the uprising, because all of these armies got mobilised, various people in various areas say, well, do you know what? The emperor's not very strong, not very young. I've got a huge army. I should declare myself. Yeah, absolutely. So there's huge civil wars about to kick off in China, and it's just this point in history. These two empires have these great stories, and in between is the beginnings of the Silk Road. Right, there's this amazing trade network where silk is travelling all the way from Three Kingdoms China all the way to Europe, and wool and silver is travelling the opposite way about it. But nobody has any real awareness of what's going on in the middle, because it's a huge wilderness, it's a huge empty wilderness. But if there's one thing we do well in video games, it's huge empty wilderness. Yeah.
Well, the map is massive.
It's 3 million square miles. Yeah, it is. We are pretty confident this is the largest handcrafted open world ever made.
And that's all fully explorable.
It is.
That's not some wild place. It's 3 million square miles, but like 1.5 million square miles is mountain ranges that you can't access.
No, when I did the calculation, I can't remember exactly how I did it. I did not count the impassable mountain squares, I think, when calculating the area. There might be a few inaccessible places in that area, but it's 95% of that is explored. Yeah, absolutely.
Even still 50 times bigger than Daggerfall.
50 times bigger than Daggerfall, which is allegedly holding the world record for the largest handcrafted open world. So,
but for how long?
Yeah, for how long?
We need to get on the
We
phone.
need to get this verified. Yes. But going back to earlier, you said you want to make this game, but also make it accessible to fans. For players, is that why you started to fund it on Kickstarter originally? No. I was really that was to build the customer base, the fan base for it.
Right. So you kind of lured me into the Kickstarter. Because the success of Hide the Sentinel at Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I'd been afraid of Kickstarter. I'm still afraid of Kickstarter. I've done one now, and I'm still terrified. But the problem we had was that the team that I had, which were how can I put this? I had 2 projects in development with Hobo Games. Right, we were hoping to land publishers for both of them, but it became apparent very early on that the publishers weren't going to touch Silk because they viewed it as too niche. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, too interesting for the publishers to touch. So I didn't want to scrap it because it was coming together really nicely. But we couldn't finish it without publisher money because there were things that we needed that the core team couldn't provide. So in the game, you hire advisors into the caravan, and there's a portrait of those advisors, and not a single member of either of these 2 teams could do high quality portraits. That's not where their skills lie. So we knew we had to get portrait artists, and we knew we had to get a musician, and so we had to do the Kickstarter to pay for the costs of these things that the team couldn't get, because we could just about take a hit on the code and the art and the QA and so forth, but I didn't have 15 grand spare to get all these other things that we needed. So that was the reason for the Kickstarter, was that there were things we couldn't afford to pay for.
Is that when you're at that point in in that most creative processes where you've had this idea, you've fostered it, you've built it, and it gets to that point where it's now or never. If we don't get this extra money for these production, these artists and the musicians, then the game's never going to be made.
That is exactly the case, because
there's always that do or die point at any creative process, isn't there?
Well,
you work so hard at it and you come to that obstacle. It's just like
really was the case that if we didn't raise the money at Kickstarter, I was going to have to can the project, which would have been devastating. And oh my goodness, what an emotional rollercoaster the Kickstarter was. Because everybody who'd heard of Lord of Midnight and loved it and heard about the Kickstarter backed us straight away. And the first 3 days were really exciting, and then everything just completely flatlined because we ran out apparently of Lords of Midnight people. And looking into it, I realised that part of the problem, which I had not really taken on board before, was the US did not have Lords of Midnight, and there was nobody in North America who had any idea what it was. So a lot of Kickstarter backers are in the States. We had none. Well, actually, that's not true. There are a few people in the US who backed it, but mostly because they knew me and trusted me to make something interesting. But yeah, we didn't get any Lords of Midnight backers because there weren't any.
It'd be interesting to see how the game's received in North America then.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how it's going to be received full stop. So we launched yesterday, but there's been no reviews yet because well, actually, what is the official story as to why we didn't have reviews ready in advance?
We haven't got enough money to spend on marketing. No, I mean we have got some reviews promised, but as always, you know, you have to chase them up to get them through.
I think a real problem with the review was the timing of the way that the release schedule worked as well.
And we weren't able to hand the codes out until a week before launch.
Yeah.
For various reasons that
quite a big game.
You and I know about. So yes, yeah.
Yeah, we got to take time to review because
yes,
it's not one of the things we've sold as well. It's not just a caravan trader down the Silk Road. You can be anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a wide open world, but open narrative as well.
It is, and the open narrative is the thing that I really wanted to do. Because as a narrative designer, somebody who is trying to find ways to do interesting storytelling in the video game medium, one of the things I loved about Lords of Midnight was precisely this way. It took the story of Lord of the Rings and then found a game way to make all those elements work with the player right in the centre, able to choose how everything is going to unfold. I think that this agency that you can give players as to unfold the story they want in the space of the world. It's not the only thing that games do that's interesting, but it's one of the great things that games do for players. So yeah, I really wanted to ensure that it had this quality, this ability for the player to make of it what you will. Although Patrick, the original producer, he's at 505 Games now, he's gone and got a credible job instead of working with me. Hi Patrick. He was one of the forces that sort of curtailed my strongest urges to give the player unlimited freedom on that front, because he quite rightly pointed out that yes, the player has unlimited freedom, but they have no idea what it is they can do or why they should be doing it. Yeah. So a little bit more shape was put on how the player interacts with the game, because otherwise players found themselves having no clue how to do anything at the beginning. And even now, I'm not going to suggest that you know, your average player on the street is going to pick this up and instantly be able to play it. It's not that kind of game. You do need to spend some time getting to grips with how it works. And that process of discovering how it works is part of the joy of the game, because the players who like that, the players who enjoy working out how a game system works, they can really get into that process with this game. And if you're not interested in the game as a system, but you're interested in the story that comes out of your actions, you can play it that way as well. You can just throw yourself into the world and see how the story develops once you're in it.
And don't you have, you mentioned you have advisors earlier, what I was reading about, you get 4 options in every city you arrive in, is that correct?
No, it's every time there's an event, and there's lots of different things that count as an event in Silk, you get a choice between up to 4 options. So you have a party. It's a bit like the party in a Japanese RPG to some extent, because in a Japanese RPG, once the characters are with you, they're with you for good, and that's what happens in Silk. You hire people to join the caravan. You start with 2, you can hire another 5. Once they're with you for good. When you face a situation, when something happens, like wolves are approaching the caravan, or there's a storm, then 4 of the advisors will come up with suggested courses of action, what they think you should do in that situation. And one of the core things you do in the game is make a choice between the 4 options that are being offered to you. And that's why you can play the game in this story mode without worrying about the systems if you're not interested in systems. You can just play it as a story whereby these people are telling you we should put canvas around the provisions because we can't afford to lose the provisions, or they're saying we must build a shelter for the horses because we can't afford the horses to run off. You then have to make the decision as to whose course of action is the one you want to follow. I'm a very experienced still player, and I still find it agonising, some of the choices that I have to make. You saw this in the stream yesterday.
Yeah, I did.
It was supposed to be a nice, easy, gentle start, and then 2 back-to-back storms, and I'm thinking, I can't afford to lose my provisions.
Almost kicked the bucket.
I did.
You had a genius escape, I remember, at one point.
Yeah, I did.
You figured out how to... you bought an oxen, or and then figured out how to trade it for the... Go on, you tell it, because you're better than I am.
Yeah, so what went wrong was, I was playing the Warlord, who is one of the, there's 2 battle and 2 trade exploration destinies that you choose at the beginning that just sets up the conditions you start with and the goal conditions at the end. So I've got this, so you've got 30 cavalry bumming around in the Kushan Empire, which is basically the wastelands north of India. And I get 2 back-to-back storms, and 2 of the horses run off in the storm, and there's not enough horses to transport everyone, so we're reduced to marching in the middle of nowhere, and I'm just thinking, oh no, what am I going to do? I've got no resources, nothing I can sell or buy, and I'm just desperately trying to work out how to solve the problem. The first thing I try is trying to chase after bandits and try and steal their horses, but even though we can defeat the bandits, we didn't manage to steal any horses from them. But as Rob was alluding to, I eventually realised if I found a city that I could get to, and I could trade some of my horses for the camels. Yeah. And the camels are stronger and can carry 2 riders. And I was able to plug the gap in my caravan by just buying just enough camels to get back to be able to move around at decent speed. There was a real sense of relief. When that came in, I really didn't want on the launch stream to die horribly in the middle of the Kushan.
I, on the other hand, watching this stream, I was like,
But going back to like saying it's 4 options.
Yeah.
Is it easy to see what the outcome's going to be, or are you sat there looking at this going, I don't know, if I do this, this is going to happen, or I don't know what's going to happen.
The game tells you what's at stake. So a goods bar crops up at the bottom and will say, if you do this, there's a chance you'll lose provisions and horses and wool, say. Or it'll tell you there's 2 lights. One light that says the caravan spirit will be raised, and one that says the caravan spirit will fall. So you have a fair idea of what stake in the decision is. You don't know
anything about the outcome.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can see something. There's no, when you get 4 options, say there's no obvious best answer. It could be a good one, could be a bad outcome.
Absolutely, and a lot of the criticism we got in the first round of testing was I don't have any idea what's at stake in these decisions, which is where the goods bar design came from, so that we could signal at least what you could stand to gain or lose by choosing a particular option. But you don't know how it's going to pan out. So in the game last night that we were playing for the launch stream, I attacked a city that I should never have attacked, and I'm looking at the options, and one of them, the soldiers basically saying, well, I'll march against Citadel if you like, but we'll probably all die. And I'm thinking, okay, that doesn't sound like fun. And somebody else is saying, if we wait till nightfall, we might be able to sneak over the walls and open the gates. And I'm thinking, that's just crazy enough, it might work.
So, how did you, this is such a brilliant project, sounds like such an amazing game, and it comes from such a place of love as well, by the time you're
Absolutely, yeah.
So how did you come to be working with Rob?
Well, as I mentioned before,
you said no publisher wanted to touch it.
No, say
is that a nod to your mentality?
Yes, no.
Do you love these big projects?
When you say mentality, you mean
insanity.
Yeah, it is the case that no sane publisher would touch it, and so we went to talk to you.
It's a good advert, that.
Yeah. But how did you guys come to be working?
Oh well, we've known each other for years. I think.
Yeah.
When I was working on hydrophobia, that's when I first met Chris, because you were pitching to do some consultancy on.
Yeah, that's it. We came into the consult on hydrophobia, and we delivered a document on it. I don't think anything came of it.
I can't remember. I've purged all that from my memory.
So we might have even got paid. I'm not sure.
Don't ask me.
But we started drinking with Rob periodically.
Yes.
Because it's an important part of Manchester life is to go to the pub with fellow.
And then it's one of the bits I love about games media the most. It's we come to the event, but it's the networking after that's the important bit. That's where we get our reviews from.
It's the point of networking.
Yeah, it's the point of networking that no one sees that off camera. It's hard work, trust me.
and I think we reconnected at Gamescom 2017 when I had Hyper Sentinel on the stand.
Yes.
And we had a conversation there about what we were doing with Hyper Sentinel and how we were going about things. And you were obviously interested in. You were bringing together your idea of how you develop
absolutely.
Games.
The fact this neo-retro branding that you came up with for Hyper Sentinel, obviously bells rang in my head.
This sounds familiar. This sounds right.
We didn't talk to you about publishing it for a long time because initially the hope was to get a publisher with deep pockets who would fund it.
Not much in there.
When you've got deep pockets, just short arms.
That's right.
But then we reached a point in the project whereby, because we'd raised the Kickstarter to pay for the stuff we couldn't do in-house, we could actually finish the game without having to get upfront money. And then it was a matter of, but we still need to publish it, and we've no direct publishing experience. We've always worked with other companies. So Huey was a great company to go and...
So getting that Kickstarter, it kind of sounds like it freed you up to pick a publisher you wanted rather than a publisher you needed?
I think, to be honest, it just hit us with a gold brick. It hit us with a gold brick on the final night of the Kickstarter when we discovered that we passed it, when we were absolutely convinced we were going to fail. You were as shocked as I was.
I was absolutely gobsmacked because we had discussions a few days. Well, probably from halfway through the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
This is looking amazing.
Yeah.
This is looking really difficult. In the last few days, it's like, well, we've written it off. It's not going to happen.
How much short were in the last couple of days then?
We were a good $5,000 short when we went into the last.
That kind of looks like it's. If you get to the halfway point and you're not hit your goal, it's kind of
not
going to work.
We had
you're going to run out of steam at that point.
Yeah. So it was amazing. Yeah. It was amazing. I was totally blown away by that.
Did you ever think about where that last surge came from?
No, there was a number of different things. So firstly, it was in the last 3 days, Rob and I really ramped up the advertising. Although it was tricky because I was at GDC at the time.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do anything to promote it, which was also really frustrating. So for me, it was the last day of the Kickstarter. I'd just come back from GDC and I just launched myself into it. Well, you'd been plugging it for the last 3 days.
That's right.
So it came with three things, and the first thing that it was the existing backers. Several of the existing backers raised the amount that they'd pledged, which helped bring up the amount that we got. And bless you, backers.
That sounds like backers that really want it.
Yeah,
I'll back it this price and go. Actually, I'm going to up it to get it over the line. Yeah,
and then
that's brilliant.
secondly, it was the people who were like, oh, I didn't know this Kickstarter was going on, who we found on the last day because of the giant push we made in the last day. And then there was one generous benefactor who basically pushed us over the edge and covered the rest of the cost for us. And between those three, we just
scraped. And we weren't the publisher at this point. We'd done a deal to basically help you promote the Kickstarter and help Bill promote the Kickstarter.
I got Rob in because we hadn't done a Kickstarter. Patrick and I were utterly terrified, and still are. Patrick's saying he's never going to do a Kickstarter again. He's at 505 now, so he doesn't need. But yeah, so Rob had done the Kickstarter. It made sense to make a deal to help him.
Successful at Kickstarter.
Yeah, I think I'm on to number 5 or 6 now.
Yeah,
so glutton for punishment.
Yeah, well, yes, yes, we've got a formula that is less stressful.
You're not waiting until the last day.
No, we're trying not to.
But yeah, at that point, Huey Davis's involvement was just to manage the Kickstarter for us. That was all it was. It was only afterwards, as we got a little bit further down the line, that we began to have discussions about actually maybe Huey is the right publisher for this.
And because we can do the porting as well, so we were able to do the Switch. John at Huey Games worked on the Switch ports.
Mm-hmm.
So that made it more, we can get it out now, not just on Steam, but also on Switch.
Yeah.
And then this gives us a path to deliver on the game. So,
I said, what made you decide to launch it on Switch? Because it doesn't feel like a game that would suit the Switch, but then again, the Switch is a really good indie market. So.
You say it doesn't seem like
it sounds like a PC
it
type
works
game.
Brilliant. It works well on the PC. Don't get me wrong. I played it a lot on the PC, but even I mentioned being at GDC. At GDC, I borrowed a Huey Games dev kit with the game on it, so that I could show it to publishers and see if I could persuade any of them to have a lapse in sanity and sign it. But I was staying with my brother-in-law, who was also a backer of the Kickstarter in the end, and he lived just outside of San Francisco at the time, so I had a long train journey to get into San Francisco for it, and I was playing the rough cut, the alpha build of Silk on the train in and out, and it just so works so well on the handheld. It's just it just works. Now we did have some problems with font sizes at first because there was quite a bit of text that was hard to read, but once that was fixed, it's perfect for the Switch in handheld mode. Although I still like playing it on the TV on the Switch as well.
But also what you alluded to, it feels like at the moment in terms of the consoles for indies, the Switch is
the massive spot for indie games.
Yeah, you've just got the best opportunity, and that's been sort of reflected in the sales figures for some of the other games we've done as well. So it seemed like a good choice to lead on the Switch. It's very indie friendly platform.
And these are plans because you launched yesterday, didn't you?
We did.
Feels like it was a year ago already.
It does.
Yesterday.
Yes. Which was I lost the track of dates. 10th of October yesterday.
Yesterday was the 11th.
11th, so I lost track of dates. Just give people watch this later. But so you launched just on Steam and Switch.
Yes, although we had a devil of a job launching on Steam.
Oh God.
We were supposed. So we knew that the Switch version was going to come out at 3 o'clock Central European, which is 2 o'clock UK. So we thought we'll launch on all platforms at 2 o'clock. So 2 o'clock comes around, and you tell us
on Steam. On Steam, you manually launch the game. So there's a button you press, and and that button will only appear once you have had your store page approved by Valve, and you've had the game build approved by Valve, and your game has been on coming soon for at least 2 weeks.
Right.
Then the button appears. Store page has been approved. Game build has been approved. The game has been on coming soon for 6 weeks or something like that.
No buttons.
And we're thinking, we're like, what the hell's it? And we look at the documentation. It says any time on your launch day you can press the button. I've launched a game on Steam before. It's not like, and then we're like, well, when they say any time you launch, they must mean when they've woken up in Seattle. So we convinced ourselves that's the case. We waited until 9 or 10 a.m. We're like, still no button. And then we're like, well, it says the estimated launch is the 11th of October at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So we thought, well, it must be that.
No, we'll wait for that.
We'll wait for that time.
We got to 1 p.m. Pacific time, which is 9 p.m. UK, and we're like, it's still no button!
It should have been on 2 a.m. It's now 9 p.m.
Messaging Valve going, we've got no button. And then
Nathan, the programmer, he looked at Steamworks and said, you've got this red section in the checklist for the store page, which we didn't look at because we've got the store page.
Yeah, approved.
So
I still don't understand what happened, but basically it's a Brazilian age rating questionnaire that we hadn't completed, but I don't think it existed.
And this is what we think. We did the survey, and then they added Brazil as a country to it, so it reset the survey. And then it didn't count as everything being completed.
And presumably they sent us an email saying, by the way,
we've had
a thing, but it probably went to my spam folder or something.
Yeah, no.
So anyway, because we didn't think to re-look at the checklist we'd already completed and had approved.
Why would you?
If it's all from set, you can see it.
Right, Brazilian age ratings were like, right, does it have blood in it? No, does it have this? Does it have that? I went through this, submitted it. It's quite easy because it's not, submitted it and the button appeared. And launch! And meantime, Chris has advertised that his launch stream is going at 9 p.m. So so then suddenly the stream started about 12 minutes past 9.
Yeah, so. Pretty much the most exciting run up to launch I
think we're painting ourselves in glory of knowing what we're doing.
I think you come across as incredibly British.
Yes.
Yeah. There's that, we don't know how this got through, but stiff up a letter, we made it somehow.
We've made it, and it's out there, and people are buying it, so that's fantastic.
So first day sales look
we don't know yet.
You don't know yet.
Because we immediately left to come to
it's closed, I don't want to look at it.
We'll look at it on Monday, I reckon.
We'll look at it on Monday.
Is it only available digitally at the moment?
Yes.
Yes.
For those who've got, right there, you've got these wonderful Hewson, Huey games.
Well, this is actually your own cassette for your Kickstarter backers, isn't it?
Yeah. So for the Kickstarter backers, we promised them that we could make these cassettes in the style of the old 8-bit games that are actually USB drives, so you can just plug it into the computer to run the game. Although initially this will only be going out to Kickstarter backers, the limited edition version will only go to Kickstarter backers, but the other version we'll have some more that we can sell. So any retro heads with a particular interest in cassette-shaped objects to fill that particular hole in your collection.
Beside Lords of Midnight.
Beside Lords of Midnight. Right. Well, actually, I have a horrible feeling that the box for Lords of Midnight was one of these horrible, oversized cardboard box affairs.
Oh, the clamshell.
Yeah. It was a big cardboard thing with a plastic insert in the centre of it. Maybe we should have done that. But yes, anyone with a collection of retro cassettes, we will have we'll have some spares that we can offer you through. I'm not sure where yet because we don't have a storefront. We might have to borrow yours.
I'm not sure. And there's the plans to bring it to Xbox and PS4 all down the line, or?
Fingers crossed. Yes.
Yes, we have a plan. We have a plan.
But we know how well the last ones have worked.
Yeah.
From the launch story and everything else.
Yes, there is a plan. And hopefully we'll be like Hannibal in the A-Team, you know.
Just something it sounds like an amazing story. From idea to getting it out.
It's been a great project to work on. It really has, and it's a great team as well. I really enjoyed working with Nathan, Jamie, Patrick, Sean, and Becky, the portrait artist, and John and Robert Huey as well. It's been a really good. I've enjoyed working with a lot of teams over the years. I've sung the praises of Limbic earlier, but this has been a particularly special project.
It has been a lot of fun. Yes.
And finally, for anyone interested, I know the Kickstarter's finished now, but the Steam. Stoffel is just Steam.
It's on Steam.
Nintendo eShop.
It's Silk. It's on Nintendo eShop.
On the front page of the eShop at the moment. Is that right?
It's on, because it's in new releases until Tuesday when more new games come
out.
It's on the front page. So I don't know if this will be out before Tuesday.
This will be tomorrow.
So until Tuesday, it's on the front page of new releases on eShop. And it's #SilkGame, if you're into hashtags on Twitter. Is there anything else, anywhere else that we should...
I don't know, but there's launch discounts. How much is the launch discount?
The launch discount is 20% until Friday.
Yeah, because I was looking earlier, it's quite cheap as well for a game. Because I was looking at the Nintendo American eShop, I was researching quickly. And I think it was like $12.99.
$12.99.
Down at $9.74, I think it was.
Yeah, so in the American shop,
yes.
So that's obviously just under $10.
Just under
you might notice that.
Yeah.
And I think here it's $8.99, but with 20% it's £7.19 until Friday.
Yeah. I'm going to try and work out how many pennies that was per 3 million square miles. I'll put that in the description when I get home. I'll figure that out later.
Good value for money. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time, Rob. Thank you.
Great pleasure.
Thank you. So that's all the description will be in the bottom there, all the links. Go buy it. I mean, it's why we love indie games, but it's not just for the game themselves and creativity. It's the amazing madcap developers behind them. There's wonderful stories as well. So be a part of gaming history and be a part of helping this man achieve his dream. So click on the links below and go buy it. And until next time, take care, guys.